Well, thank you everyone for your presentation. It was really interesting. And so now we'll switch to the discussion, which will be with Irina and Nissim. We're here and I guess half presented, so you already know some of them. But you guys could maybe present yourself quickly. Also, do we have another mic or do we need to go around?
Okay, just one.
Okay. On the room.
Hello everyone. My name is Irina Lyan. I'm from the Hebrew University. I really enjoyed this panel. I think it was amazing, and actually it combined all levels we study. Right? It has national level, international level, and the world view on Hallel, which is quite amazing because we can see it from so many perspectives. I have much to say, but I'd like to give a few questions to each of one of the presenters and start up a discussion and Q&A. To the first presentation, it was amazing ethnographic study, diasporic gastronationalism, right? And I wondered about two things. I was especially interested in your presentations as I did ethnography on Korean Christian community in Jerusalem. So food was such an important part of this community. And one of my findings is the connection between religion and food. If you want to eat good Korean food in Israel, you have to go to church first, right? And only after the service you can eat it. So I wonder if you also saw some religious influences on this gastronationalism or connection with Christianity or other religions. Another one goes to diasporic nationalism, right? As John Lee and many others actually told us, diasporic nationalism is a paradox, right? You can be nationalist only from inside, but from outside, so this tension goes on. So, about definition of Korean food, did you see any tension how diaspora defines Korean food? Or maybe transforms it, or maybe change it? And the government definition, what's K in Korean food? And to Jimin, thank you so much. Amazing presentation, big data as well. And I wonder how your students, I hope your students enjoyed watching all these films and measuring it, yeah? So one thing that I'd like to ask is I don't work on this hypothesis, H1, H2, and 3. Did you find anything surprising beyond your expectations? Right? So yeah, I also would like to suggest that they probably would be maybe pro-Chinese or Chinese neutral, but did anything surprise you? Did you find somebody that you didn't expect from the before you started this very important, let's say, study on Chinese-Korean battles in the cinema? And I really like your example of Vincenzo, right? They eat Chinese food in Korean drama. It's unbelievable and understand the national sentiment of Korean viewers. And I'd like you to tell us more on Chinese-Korean relations, because we can do much about in 15 minutes, but hanbok wearing in Olympics and the big debate of if Korea is part of China, if Koreans are Chinese, of course, but there's so much more is going in Korean-Chinese representation, and cinema is just one battlefield that discusses, and maybe, just maybe, do they underline difference, similarities, common cultural roots, same history, right? And I remember Dejan Game saying, oh, of course, it's a Chinese history, it's not Korean one, so amazing battle, and we should expect for much more. Final question, did you see any role of diaspora, like for example, in actors, that we choose actors of Korean regions in Chinese cinema? I was wondering, again, because of Olympics, because it was actually Josung Jok who put hanbok and had such a big national and international scandal. To our presentation, it's difficult to ask questions to something that we just started. But again, I think all of us know that Hallel is a huge thing, but we don't know how big, right? So suddenly to see this 8 million newspapers and actually see all these numbers for me was strange, right? I'm working more than 10 years on this subject, and suddenly to see how big it is was interesting experience, I would say, right? Actually, Korea stands before Japan on the country by prominence in news, and I think some people wouldn't believe us, right? Especially in Japanese studies. And what I found interesting points of going a little bit deeper, like it's big data, but we need to go in depth and to see what's happening under the water, is of course combination of soft and hard powers. You could see same in Jimin presentation. It's a soft power of cinema, but very much political one. Somehow we see this overlap, and the combination between global south, global north. News are different there. Regional covering of Korea is different from far coverage of Korean entertainment, and then yeah, I'm looking forward to this research because I'm really excited. I don't work with big data at all. For the final presentation, thank you so much. I think it's such an important question: how to maintain innovation. It's not only cultural innovation; it's also about economic innovation, technological innovation. And it's such a big question because how we keep Hallyu alive, as all of us know in this room. Hallyu is what brings students into class, and they later ask us hard question, but what did we see in K-pop, in cinema? And I think it goes back to our keynote, right? Is Hallyu some kind of tsunami one time? Is it just a big wave that's going to pass and disappear? Nissim, please don't fall asleep. Is it a revolution? Yeah, I know. Is it like one-time revolution and we're going to, read about it later in history books? Or is it here to stay, to evolve, to become something else, to innovate? And I think first time we came to this conference, 2013, everyone would say Hallyu is going to die soon. It's just a fad, it's going to disappear like in 2-3 years. So we are wasting our time, basically, working at such a subject. And of course, Korean Foundation panel on Hallyu studies inside Korean studies in this July was a continuation of this debate. Hallyu studies is just, fashion that we should forget about. But my question is going to go to some different direction. You mentioned squid game, you mentioned parasite. So, my students come to me and ask me, oh, is it the same in Korean society? Everyone is poor or people die in the streets. So actually, it's a huge blow to the soft power, right? Of course, Nissim told us that bad news are good news. But in this case, all this fantasy about soft power and Korean positive image in the world is blown up by such great texts, let's say, right? So what's going to be? Is it good for Korea? Is it bad for Korea? Or shouldn't we just go to another question? Maybe it's not about good or bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Eva said everything, so I'll just make it very short. 3 short questions, actually. Thank you for the presentations first. Actually, about the culinary culture, Korean culinary culture in Argentine, it's really interesting. But if you look at Hallyu, at all the Ks, K-pop and K-drama and K-this, the least successful K is the K-food. The Korean government is not successful in exporting Korean food as a part of Hallyu, as a part of its globalization. Nowhere closer to where the Japanese food, for example. If you look at the spread of sushi, if you look at sake, the Japanese sake, you can find it in many restaurants. I don't know why shoju is not as popular in other places in the world, but actually, interestingly, in the United States, the people responsible for the popularity of sushi are Koreans, actually. So if you look at there's sushi restaurants all over the United States, so actually the question is this, I love Korean food. Why hasn't it been successful outside of some, very small pockets like the one you described? If you have an idea, I don't know if you have the answer, maybe you can sell it for a lot of money for the Korean government. But only if you have an idea. The second one is actually for Jimin. You tried to talk about the mixture of political and economic factors in the Chinese film industry. And actually, I think that if you look at the way that I don't know, Chinese political economy, the way that Chinese makes decisions about media, which can have some kind of political risk, is that it is very much, it's a process which is very contested, which is very negotiated. There are some red lines, you have things you cannot talk about at certain things, but it's very much a kind of mediated, negotiated process between the private market and the government. And in the West, we tend to actually distinguish between political motives and economic motives. But in the Chinese case, it's actually a kind of mixture of it. It's very contextualized, negotiated, mediated, and so on. So I was wondering if you can push actually your paper further and try to think about even terrorizing it. Actually, not have this distinction between this is politics, this is economy, but actually try to think about different new theory coming up from your text about this process, which is based on the Chinese example. And for the last speaker, do you think that Koreans are unique? You told that actually, basically, the Koreans, that the Hallyu is built on, Koreans' storytelling ability. I know many nations with very good storytelling abilities. So I think that we have to be careful about stating that Korea is unique and Korean culture is unique and this is the basic of it. I don't know a nation which is not unique. I don't know people that are saying, "Oh, we're not unique, we're not special, we're just people." No, I think every country has it. So we have to think a bit further. Actually, what is this Korean uniqueness, and if this uniqueness is actually the basis for what we're saying about Hallyu. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. Thank you.
So I guess I'll give the mic to
Well, thank you for the comments and questions. Regarding churches, as maybe you might know, Korean Christian churches in the diaspora have great relevance. They are not only like religious spaces, but very important social spaces for migrants in different places where Korean migrants are settled, and so is in Buenos Aires. We have, I think, around 40 Christian churches in the city, 2 Buddhist temples, and I think 2 of that 40 churches are Catholic, and the rest are Christian but not evangelists. And so these spaces were of great relevance for Koreans in Argentina and in Buenos Aires, and of course in the weekends after the service, Korean food is prepared. I have found very interesting things happening in those meals. You can find differences among the generations, the first migrant generations, and some meals that are in charge of these harmonies and the Korean moms, but there are also some services in charge of the younger Korean Argentines, and you can see the different decisions they make and how Korean food is reinterpreted in each cases. Also, there are a lot of things related to solidarity, and perhaps when some kimchi is left, there's a system of taking care of who might not have kimchi at home, or maybe young people living in the city because the families live somewhere, so they should take all the kimchi that is left. So there are a lot of things related to Korean food and Korean migrants in Buenos Aires identity happening in churches meal. So then the other question related to what is Korean food maybe for the migrants and for the government. I think, of course, there are differences, but I would go further on that, and I would say that among migrants, Korean migrants in Buenos Aires, there isn't one definition or one image of what Korean food is. Maybe if I try to think of some generalities, a lot of people told me that Korean food in Buenos Aires, at least for the first generation, is very much what Korean food used to be in the 80s in Korea. That's when the major part of Korean migrants left and established in Buenos Aires. So there are a lot of the characteristics that And of course, it has a lot to do with migrants' own experiences, and in some cases, for example, for second generation, they were taken care when they were child, maybe by people, non-Korean people that took care of them and cooked some other meal. I don't know, maybe one told me, my favorite meal is gnocchis, like an Italian food, but maybe with some spice that they added. So, even for Korean community in Buenos Aires, Korean food is a lot of different things, and especially now that there are second and third generation Korean Argentines that are chefs that go to culinary schools, and they are starting to think about, more structured and way of what might be Korean Argentinian cuisine, and they are starting to think on fusions, but in a more academic or formal way. And maybe, I think that we can talk a lot about these heterogeneities and differences, and about the successfulness or not on Korean cuisine. Well, maybe yes, if you compare it with or Japanese or French cuisine or Italian cuisine, even Mexican cuisine that has a long history of presence in the world of gastronomism, yes, maybe Korea isn't in the first place or the second place, but if we compare it some years ago with the present situation, I think that, at least in Buenos Aires, there has been a huge change. And not only the things that I presented related to the urban space and the access to these different spaces, but also now, especially in these 2 last years, it's quite easy to find Korean ingredients and Korean preparations in restaurants in Buenos Aires, not non-Korean restaurants, but any other restaurants, including gochujang or kimchi in the recipes. And for example, yes, kimchi is like almost, I don't know, maybe in small cities it's not the case, but at least in Buenos Aires, almost everyone knows what kimchi is now, which was unthinkable like 5 years ago. So yes, I think the successfulness or not is like we will see then. Of course, I think that the same question on what will happen with this. It's just a very brief trend, or it will continue. What will happen? We don't know. But yes, I think that there have been huge changes, at least in my city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. So prime reason, okay. As I am business economist, I just focused on the investment from this country and that country to create an industry, and then I was interested to analyze the invest mode, basically by company or by funding project or this kind of things. So when I noticed this kind of strange movement, it was 2016. And then I asked actually around the professors, of the media studies, and I asked them if there is anything like that. And then most of them they said, no, that doesn't make any sense. That's what they said. And then a lot of them actually they said, no, you just have some kind of biased idea towards something. And then they discourage to do this kind of research. And then I just wanted to prove by statistics, and this is what I do. And another thing is actually I met some people from the Hollywood studios, and then we talk about it actually. And then one person told me that one of the reasons that the long time ago Brad Pitt he appeared in a film like 7 years in Tibet, and because of that, actually Chinese government blocked his entrance to China. It happened. And Charleston had the same problem. Engineers really had the same problem. And also because of Chinese, American studios want to distribute their films in China, so on purpose they have to be some messages. Some kind of Chinese message, right? So they have to do some sort of self-censorship. Then one of the reasons that Brad Pitt came up with his own production, Plan B, And then this is one of the reasons that that he wanted to have his own, but otherwise he cannot do anything. So I heard of it, and I just wanted to check with Korean industry. As I said, I never expected such a thing because politics and this kind of I'm not related to this one. But then so when I did it, it was kind of surprising. Another one, I didn't talk much here. Another thing is when it comes to Chinese investment, actually the scenario scripture, and then there is a smelly. Some scenario scripture. I mean, they use someone else's name, but actually it's not the person who wrote it. So we don't know exactly what's going on. Also, the funding is very curious. Some organization it disappeared all of a sudden. It existed, then the next day it disappeared. So there's something is going on, but I cannot prove it. So this is why I just stand by the data sets. China and Korea relationship and then the culture thing. Actually, this is related to past presentation somehow. But then when it comes to culture and the kimchi, you mentioned about it, and she also mentioned about it. From my view, I have a really different view though. I mean, when it comes to spaghetti, and then they believe that this is the Italian traditional one. But then I asked them, hey, where did you get the tomato? It is not from Europe. It's from South America. So basically, you have to keep spaghetti after it comes from America. That's it. Actually, when it comes to kimchi and chili, it comes from the spice itself is from Latin America as well. So basically, the kimchi you have that happened after 16th century. So it's not really tradition. Okay, and then the other day, I met some people from China. They said, hey, Dr. Park, actually kimchi from Korea. They said, no, I don't think so. They said, well, if you have it, that should be after Columbus. So it's not. We just share something. And then we discuss this kind of things anyway. So it's a long discussion. Regarding Nissim's, it's a good idea. But at this stage, I went over it to say that they never talk about this kind of things. So this is the first morning I just came up with the stats data, and then actually I'm digging on what you're saying. So it can be really interesting, but however, it's kind of difficult to have full data, and then I asked some people to have interview, and then I got confused. And then the paper actually I wrote it, I submitted it to a journal. It's a Chinese owned. And then the first review, the first round, actually they said it's very interesting. And then they said you have to modify. So I did, okay, it's a major revision. So I did it, I submitted it. And then the second result I got it, and then it was pretty much positive. But then the journal rejected. And they said because of it's personal conversation with the reviewers, they asked us to reject this paper and it should not publish this Chinese journal. So things going on. So I actually submitted this paper to several Chinese journals because I think that makes more sense. To show that my paper actually worked, not Korean journal, not American journal. And then all of the second journal, they just rejected this. They did the test rejection. They said no. So it happened. So I'm looking for a journal. Right? This is a non-Chinese journal. Exactly. I tried Taiwanese. They also refused.
For practicality purposes, I propose the mic stays here for now, and then we'll move it over there.
To your question, Koreans are not unique in storytelling. I didn't make that claim at all. Just I mentioned that Koreans are, at this point in history, tells the story well and skillfully, meaning tragicomic elements into storyline. And so they are not unique. Storytelling is in every culture, and through storytelling, we pass down collective memory. And so every culture has a storytelling. But Koreans now using media, telling stories, a bit better, more skillfully. That's all I claim. And when I was growing up, my grandmother and also all the adults in the community told stories, at night. But these days, intergenerational connection has been disrupted. So we don't hear stories from our previous generation. We go to theater, or these days Netflix. We hear stories. And so using media, Koreans at this point are telling a bit better, more skillfully stories. Making more universal appeal. I think that's the difference, not storytelling itself. Thank you.
Did you guys ask a question or not really? I don't remember.
No,
I don't think so.
No,
ideas.
No, it's, I mean, it's you guys' presentations, okay. No, but then, I mean, the whole topic was like really interesting for your presentation because I think, I mean, obviously news coverage of a topic is very important, and actually seeing in numbers how high South Korea ranks, like, I mean, you can have an inkling about it, but then you're like, oh, okay, actually this is really happening. Like, it's really, really high, it's really impressive. So for example, like with for example, my own experience with recent coverage of Korea, I didn't present myself actually for some people who might not know me, so I'm a journalist and I work as a writer also about Korean culture, so I write books about the phenomenon and usually for more like mass audiences. I also wrote a book about Squid Game just after it came out, so basically because it was so short after it came out, my main source was articles, like media articles, because that's all there was. Interviews were in there. Netflix was very tight with how to give interviews, so like a lot of my material came from that. And I have to go through so many so many articles. It's crazy. Like they're all copying each other, especially like in this like a cascading thing that went from like this one article and I don't know, like a big media in America, and then all American content copied it, and then you had all different countries that spoke English that copied it, and then it kind of like went back to French media that just copied it as well. It was really impressive how much of the, and also like you lost some stuff in the grapevine, and some were mixing up things, or you would have also mainstream, like the titles were really interesting also, because in most countries like you would have always Parasite, BTS kind of related to it, and then you have coverage here or in countries that have been in touch with Korean culture for like way longer, that cover more on, okay, this actor is going to the army, this is what's going on like in cinema and stuff, and I feel like it is starting to come up, like there's more and more traditional medias that are starting to have like their own part that actually addresses those news, so that's pretty, anyway, that was pretty interesting, and so I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit more about things that maybe you can expose, because, 20 minutes.
So, the fact that South Korea is very prominent in the news, if you remember, there is a breakdown of which countries mention South Korea. It's mainly Japan and China, and it's related to all the others' presentation, because if the Chinese see that there is a wave and they surf on this wave because they want to exploit it, to put some political messages in it. But the Koreans are also depend on the Chinese audience. There is a relationship that should be maintained in order to keep the soft power in action. And that's something that we see here throughout the presentations. there is much more to explore here. It's just something we touched now, and the fact that, for example, there is this division between Asian news that cover South Korea in the entertainment section. We didn't explore it deeply, but we still see that there is more separation between hard and soft news, so they don't involve politics. That's something we would like to see. On the other hand, the United States and UK, they make this connection now more. Politics, hard and soft news. So that's something that we should try to realize, what does it mean theoretically, and what are the implications of such a trend. There's still much more to do. Thanks.
I have one thing I completely forgot, which was I was initially fascinated with the storytelling by BTS, each song, and I discovered that viewers, the followers, army people, follow BTS because of stories they are telling in each story, the meaning of it. It's so deep. And it was so fascinating. In pop song has the stories, and so philosophical stories, meanings behind it. They very skillfully weaved into their song. It's very fascinating.
Well, actually, do you have any input on that, or also could be you're not Nissim or not
I have one comment. Actually, I would like to combine and add the Nissim argument. News don't only provide mental maps, but actually draw them and redraw them. So it's both reflecting and reproducing what national images are. So I think it's a dual job, and we have much time to work on it.
And actually, one thing I remember from your presentation is at some point you were asking about why Brazil or Thailand or some other countries are so high in the South Korean news consumption. So I have no idea if anyone has any input about this here, but if anyone does, I don't know, maybe from somewhere else in the world, have some sort of input. No. Just asking, because since you were asking earlier, I just figured I would ask also. Nope. Okay. No. I mean, it's interesting. For example, Thailand is a particularly interesting one, and I wonder if it has a lot to do with all the culture around BL that's going up. So I don't know, because if you look in the world, really Thailand is coming up more and more with their content, their Lakhorn. Which is the name for you have K-drama, you have Lakhorn in Thailand, basically, and they tell story of boys' love. So they really are specializing in that, and it's really coming up. So I have no idea, for example, it could be a thing.
Maybe just one point to emphasize. In one of the slides, we also show that a lot of media attention in Korea is dedicated to neighboring countries like China and Japan, and we can cite it, but actually it also includes a lot of news about entertainment. So actually, if you look about Hallyu, you look about the position of Hallyu, it's not a unidirectional flow of culture. Actually, Korea is absorbing also a lot of the cultural influence for coming outside. So actually, we should think about it more as a kind of more dialogical way, or a kind of reciprocal way that the flow of culture is coming. Japanese culture used to have, it still has quite a lot of influence in Korea, especially in animation and in manga, Western culture, Hollywood movies. I think they are the second most watched, most popular movies in Korea after Korean movies, right? So actually, we have to think about it as a kind of, it's a global Hallyu, but it's not like the sun coming out of Korea. It's actually a lot of sunlight is coming into Korea as well, and it comes in our pictures. Of course, there are many in this research. I think there are many pitfalls. We have to move from the big data sometimes to actually to look at more qualitative research. So I think that this paper addresses a few questions, but it cannot address, I think, all the questions, and there is no questions about Brazil and Thailand. Here, a more focused actually research is necessary. Let me just add another thing about Halley, which has to do with the big picture. There is one of the theories, I tried to look at it, I mentioned the Padwai, but actually there is the geolinguistic theory that argues that cultures flows much better along linguistic lines, right? So if you look at, try to think about regions based on languages, right? Let's say you have the Spanish telenovelas, area region, you have the Egyptian movies among the Arabic states, which actually builds on the language. Of course, you have the United States, which is English basically. But actually, particularly the Hallyu, I think, is interesting because it flows across linguistic and cultural lines, right, boundaries. So here, language is not an issue in this sense, right? And this, I think, it's really interesting about Hallyu because it manages to go to other languages, and language is not a barrier in this sense, and it shows also in our research.
Actually, that's like super interesting, especially if you look at the other topics of the Hallyu, because I feel like, we focus so much on K-drama, K-pop, K-food, K-cinema. They're like the four main ones, but if you look at you have fashion, you have animation, Korean animation is like not super big in terms of, but for kids, I mean, Baby Shark is from Korea, and I dare you to find a kid that does not know the songs. It's like really big, and I mean, I was in Indonesia when it came out, and I just remember, like, I was just, you're along this beach with people, like, and literally, like, you would hear Baby Shark every 3 seconds, like, you would just have all the kids listening to it, and you go all around the world, and, like, Korean culture is just blowing up, and not just with those. And I think that this is also maybe something that needs to be more addressed, like how all of the culture is really, growing itself, like it's all cascading again, like I like my cascades, like it's really like going around, and then you really have like all those other aspects. For example, fashion, it's really hard to like pinpoint the effect of it, but in France, I mean, especially this year, we've had like a few events that happened where the Korean stars that were here to promote Korean fashion, or even be how do you call this, like the main person of like a brand, I don't remember the term, but yeah, like, so it was really, really big, but because there's no, Emmy Awards or something like this for fashion, it's way harder to exactly pinpoint what's going on, but you could wonder, like, is the fact that the bob is coming back in trend really a US thing or a Korean thing, because it's been a very big trend here for 10 years, so it's like really hard to navigate. So yeah, I think it's really like important not to forget all those things that don't necessarily take language at all to like also work abroad.
And they also feed each other, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's one thing that's often forgotten, like about Korean culture, like especially in media when you read the mainstream things about it, how much all of it is feeding each other. I mean, I discovered K-food through K-dramas and that was like 12 years ago. Because you have just food every 3 seconds. Like you always have a shot of the food when people eat. It's just like all the time, and I don't even know if it was necessarily something that was, I mean, I guess you can answer, but like if it was something that was wanted from the beginning. I think it kind of was, yeah. But yeah, even now, like you look, you always have a shot of the food, always, like every time you eat, and you're like, why is this important for the plot? It's not, but it makes you more used to like knowing about the food, the culture, and yeah, everything is just interconnected, and I think this is a lot about why, I mean, that's also the K, right? The BK or the branding. Anyway, so anyone has anything else to say, a question, or should we wrap up because we're amazingly on time? It's like 12, incredible. Thank you for keeping time and